Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about 3 undervalued studs that you must draft in 2023 fantasy football. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into 3 undervalued studs that you must draft in your 2023 fantasy football drafts. We begin at number 1 with my guy, Jaylen Waddle, waddle, till the very next day, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins, current underdog ADP wide receiver 11 at pick 15.8. Now, I know for some of you, the record has just scratched, right? Nick, he is ranked inside the top 12 wide receivers on Underdog Fantasy. He's an early second-round pick. How can he be undervalued? Now, I would argue that even in best ball, you could rank him higher than wide receiver 11. He could come off the board as wide receiver 8 or 9, and I would not question that one bit. But my biggest argument is that in a lot of redraft mock drafts that I've done thus far, this guy has came off the board at the end of the second round, and sometimes he falls into the third round, which is absolutely egregious, and we see him fall so far because in a lot of redraft leagues, more running backs come off the board early on the first 2 rounds compared to Underdog Fantasy drafts. So he played in 17 games last season and was the wide receiver 7.5 PPR and the wide receiver 13.5 PPR points per game. He had 116 targets, 6.8 per game, number 24, 75 receptions, 4.4 per game, number 23, 1,356 receiving yards, 79.8 per game, number 7, and 8 total touchdowns, number 11 at wide receiver. Now, I know some of you might be a little bit sweaty right now. You might start sweating. Nick, you got him saying he might be a top 8, 9 wide receiver. If you think he's undervalued, Nick, you think he could be a top 5, top 3 guy. I think he could finish ahead of his teammate Tyreek Hill. But why do I believe that? Because he was only 24th in targets, 23rd in receptions. It's because of the drastic difference in per game stats from Jaylen Waddle having Tua Tagovailoa under center compared to Skylar Thompson or Teddy Bridgewater. It was night versus day, and it was the exact same thing with Tyreek Hill as it was with Jaylen Waddle. Both of these wide receivers were significantly better with Tua under center, which would make sense because if you watched any Dolphins games last year, Teddy Bridgewater and Skylar Thompson in a lot of these games looked like Stevie Wonder. They looked like they were blind. They couldn't read a defense at all. So Jaylen Waddle, on a per game basis, he played in 12 games with Tua, 5 games without. In the 12 games with Tua, he averaged 7.3 targets per game. Without Tua, 5.8. 4.7 receptions per game, 3.8 without Tua. And the yards and the touchdowns, it's where it is the most noticeable. 89.1 yards per game with Tua, receiving yards, 57.4 without, and then 0.7 receiving touchdowns per game with Tua, 0 without. He didn't score a single fucking touchdown when Tua Tagovailoa was out. The same thing is true with Tyreek Hill, who scored 0.6 touchdowns per game with Tua and 0 without. So it's very clear that Tua Tagovailoa is a vital piece in this offense. And even though they brought in Magic Mike White, ultimately, if you draft Jaylen Waddle and you want to make the argument for the huge upside, you want Tua Tagovailoa to stay healthy. Jaylen Waddle, even with the kind of shit tier quarterback play from the other quarterbacks, was still first in yards per target with 11.7, first in yards per reception with 18.1, third in fantasy points per target with 2.23, and 10th in route win rate. So Jaylen Waddle was really good with Tua, and he was solid without Tua. So if Tua's able to play all 17 games, if all of these jiu-jitsu things he's been doing in the offseason is going to stop him from getting hurt, if that brand spanking new helmet that makes him look like Darth Helmet from Spaceballs ends up helping this man's head and he doesn't get hurt, then I genuinely believe that Jaylen Waddle could be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. I think he could even surpass Tyreek Hill in fantasy. This is one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL with a great deep ball passer in Tua Tagovailoa. If you don't believe me, just look at the next gen stats. He was amazing with the deep ball. Jaylen Waddle could catch a 4-yard fucking slant like his name was Michael Thomas and take it to the crib. He could take the thing 80 yards up the field. We've seen it in the past. Jaylen Waddle, it has elite speed. This is one of the fastest offenses in the NFL. Mike McDaniel, in my opinion, in the second year is going to level this offense up even further. I don't know how much more I could say about Jaylen Waddle to convince you. If you don't think this guy has top 5 upside, you are just not listening correctly, in my opinion. I think Jaylen Waddle has the legitimate league-winning upside, and again, I think he's undervalued coming off the board as the wide receiver 11, especially when he comes off the board in the late second or the early third round in a lot of redraft leagues. Moving now to the second player, we got Justin Herbert, the pervert, the social media quarterback of the LA Chargers, underdog ADP quarterback 7 at pick 54.9. Last year he was the QB 11 and the quarterback 17 in points per game, but if you guys did watch last season, and you're not just looking at it from a statistical standpoint, you would have realized that once he got hurt very early on in the season, once his ribs got messed up, Tyrod Taylor style, then kind of things didn't look as good for Justin Herbert. And the kicker in it all is when he started to look better, the wide receivers were dropping like flies. Keenan Allen didn't play games. Mike Williams didn't play games. Like when Joshua Palmer is your wide receiver number 1, then there's issues in the offense, right? But he now enters this year with Mike Williams presumably healthy based upon everything that I've read. Keenan Allen at tip-top shape, and they draft Quentin Johnston. Not to mention, they have one of the best dual-threat running backs in the NFL in Austin Eckler. Justin Herbert, the pervert, doesn't have to do much to potentially gain 60 free yards and a touchdown. All he's got to do is look 6 feet to the right, dump the ball off to Austin Eckler. Because of his amazing playmaking abilities, Austin Eckler could take it to the crib. It's amazing. It's like Jaylen Waddle. You just throw the ball 4 fucking yards and you get a touchdown that ends up being 50, 60 yards. That's just how good these players are. They also have Gerald Everett. I'm not saying Gerald Everett is like some elite tight end, but he definitely is a great option inside of the red zone. So Justin Herbert has a loaded to the gills offense. Last year, his stats, again, not necessarily the best. 699 passing attempts, 41.1 per game, number 2. 4,739 passing yards, 278.8 per game, number 2. So he was top 2 in attempts and passing yards, again, despite the fact that his body was fucked up for a lot of the season and he lost a bunch of his weapons. 25 passing touchdowns at a 3.6% rate, 8th at quarterback. Again, this is something I talk about a lot. Passing touchdown rate is very easy to understand. When a quarterback is as good as Justin Herbert and they throw 3.6% rate passing touchdowns, that is terrible. That should never happen. That number should be closer to the 5% number. If a guy that you think isn't very good, for instance, if you're a Mac Jones hater and you think Mac Jones sucks and he throws 3.6% touchdowns next season, then maybe that's not that crazy. But it is crazy when there's a guy as skilled as Justin Herbert. Again, he still threw 25 passing touchdowns. It was just at a low rate. I expect that to be closer to 5, if not closer to 5.86%. Again, with all the weapons that Herbert has. 10 interceptions, 14th at quarterback. 54 carries, 14th, 147 rushing yards, 17th, and 0 rushing touchdowns. Now, Justin Herbert obviously isn't the most elusive quarterback out there. He's not going to just take one to the house like Mike Vick or like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, some of these running quarterbacks, Tim Tebow himself, taking it to the crib. But again, he has some rushing upside. It's not crazy, but could he rush for 2 touchdowns next season with how big of a boy he is? Of course. Some interesting efficiency stats, 94.1 true passer rating, 7th. He was 11th in QBR, and he had the 3rd most drop passes in the NFL, 33 drop passes. So again, if Mike Williams, this might be a hard ask, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen both stay healthy, mixed with Quentin Johnston, Eckler, and Gerald Everett, and they also have Joshua Palmer, in case a real disaster happens. This is an offense that you might argue has the best trio of wide receivers in the NFL, but Nick, Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins are better. Sure, go right ahead, but it's definitely one of the top 3 trios in the NFL, and if you include the running back, I think they're the best foursome since one you've watched on a different website that ends in tube. So Justin Herbert is set up perfectly. He's coming off the injury. He looked a lot better towards the end of the season, in my opinion, and I think he's locked and loaded for a potential top 3 quarterback season. The only thing that hurts for Justin Herbert is that he doesn't run the ball as much, which hurts in fantasy when there's guys like Jalen Hurts or Justin Fields or Lamar Jackson, who could potentially run for 1,000+ rushing yards. But before we move on into the number 3 player, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. We've talked about them already in this video. If you are new to Underdog Fantasy, they are the best place to play fantasy football best ball this summer. If you don't know what best ball is, it's the best part about fantasy football. It's the draft. You do an 18-round draft, and that's it. You don't have to ever look at it again until the end of the season because Underdog automatically sets your lineup at the end of every single week with the highest scores. There's no trades, there's no in-season management, and there is no waiver wire. So you draft it and you forget it, and you could potentially come back at the end of the season with a boatload of money. They have the biggest fantasy football contest ever, Best Ball Mania 4. $25 to enter, 150 max entries, $3 million to first place, as well as $15 million in total prizes. If the $25 entry seems a little high to you, well, you can do some Superflex drafts. The Chihuahua but Superflex, $4 to enter, 25 max entries, $25K to first, $250,000 in total prizes. If you click on the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious, you will get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. So you deposit $100, they give you an additional $100. If you want to do 25, an additional 25, 50, and additional 50. So first match, 100% deposit bonus up to $100. Make sure you guys check that out. Again, I love Underdog Fantasy. I draft on there all the time, and the streams are coming up soon. I'm going to be drafting on stream with you guys. Moving now to the final undervalued stud, in my opinion, for the 2023 fantasy football season that you need to draft right now. It is Cam Akers, running back of the LA Rams. Underdog ADP running back 22 at pick 71.8. He was the RB 33.5 PPR last season and the RB 36.5 PPR points per game, tied with AJ Dillon, Brian Robinson, as well as Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and that almost feels like a miracle after the start of the season that Akers had, which we're going to talk about very shortly. He played in 15 games. He only started 9. He had 188 carries, 12.5 per game, number 26, 786 rushing yards, 52.4 per game, 29th, 18 targets, 61st, 13 receptions, 64th. He had 117 receiving yards, 55th, and 7 total touchdowns, 19th. Again, if you guys remember back to last season, this guy was not a first or second round fantasy draft pick, but he was a top 4, top 5 round fantasy draft pick, depending on your league. And he was a bust. The first game of the season, the motherfucker scored 0 points, right? It was a disaster. Weeks 1 through 5, everyone and their mother thought he was getting traded. He sat out all the way up until week number 9, and he doesn't get traded. So Sean McVay, Cam Akers, they're like, all right, let's get me back in this lineup. And he doesn't get much opportunity, right? So the first 12 weeks of the season, you're like, why the hell did I draft this guy? Get the fuck off my team. Get out of here, pal. Cut. And it probably didn't take all the way until week 9, right? It was probably the first couple of weeks, then you just cut ties, right? Unless you're a hoarder, you had to hold on to him. Maybe you won your championship because you held on to him because, spoiler alert, he was amazing at the end of last season. Weeks 13 through 15, his touches increase. Right? In those 3 games, he has 2 games inside the top 24. So it basically was like a fucking miracle. The miracle on ice, right? This guy literally looked like he had no idea how to run the football. This offense didn't want to use him. And then magically towards the end of the season, they decide to, hey, let's use Cam Akers. And it starts to work. And then to close out the season, week 16 through 18, he has 3 top 14 performances and 1 game as the RB1. He had 1 humongous game. And again, this is on the Rams team that was just decimated. Decimated like your toilet after you eat a bunch of Taco Bell, okay? It was crazy. No Stafford, no Cup. and the defense is not playing too well, right? So you just have the worst version of the Rams. Now, I'm not saying that Matthew Stafford's going to come back and look like Matthew Stafford in 2021 when he hoisted the Lombardi. But what I'm saying is that this is a Rams offense that realistically has to be better than what they were towards the end of last season, and Cam Akers even excelled in that situation. The other Rams running backs aren't great, right? If Kyren Williams really was that guy that people were kind of hyping up last season, maybe even I hyped him up a little bit, we would have probably seen it, right? Zach Evans? You think he's going to take Sony Michel? Ronnie Rivers? Ronnie Rivers? Come on, man. These guys aren't taking over from Cam Akers. 23.4% dominator rating last year, 15th at running back. So with Cam Akers, he's not this super high draft pick in fantasy football like he was last year. He goes later. I understand he had the terrible start to the season, but if you look at the positives, once everything was kind of settled, once he realized, hey, I need to calm down, my titties need to be calmed, bam, he starts playing well. And again, this was with a much worse version of the Rams offense. So if Stafford's able to stay healthy, Kupp's able to stay healthy, there's a team that should be able to move the ball relatively effectively. They have Van Jefferson, who, again, I'm not saying is like the best wide receiver in the NFL. We all know that. And then Tyler Higbee is pretty solid tight end. They have Puka, the other wide receiver, right? They don't have a lot of options. And Cam Akers, I understand he only had 18 targets. He's not Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, like one of these crazy Christian McCaffrey, Saquon, any of those guys that can catch a bunch of passes. He's just not that guy, pal. Trust me, you're not that guy. But he could realistically get 50 targets. I think that would be kind of an outlier projection, but I think it's possible. I think this Rams team should be better again, and I think Cam Akers should be given a second chance. If he messes things up again early on the season, I'll be quick with the scissors, get him out of here. But if he's able to start off strong like I think he could, I think you might have found a steal in Cam Akers. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Again, if you ended up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy, promo code Notorious, or click on the link in the video description for a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. Make sure you guys check that out. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great rest of your guys' day. And as always, good boy.